I knew nothing else because, I was born into a criminal family. My whole life I had hatred for the police. By 1971, I was in Pentridge charged with having a shootout with the police. But it was normal. I've had guns my whole life. As a 12-year-old, I had weapons, I'm 17 years of age, hanging out with men who all been convicted for more than one murder. And, so my concept of what life meant and what life was a little bit screwed up.
Young soldier of God, steady march.
Yeah, my name's Ron. I'm the founder of The Truth About Addiction. I live in Queensland in Australia. I went to prison in 1971 as a child, as a 17-year-old boy. I spent 30 months in prison at that stage, got out and went in and out of prison for the next 10 years. Basically, I became a heroin addict, so I started using heroin and started using drugs in prison and got out and continued with my addictions. In 1981, I got out of prison and I went to a drug rehabilitation centre. I went back to prison in 82 from charges still from that same charge that I went to rehab in. And then I stayed out of prison from 82 to 2002. I stayed drug-free. And in 2002, I got arrested again and got sentenced to 18 years imprisonment for importation of cocaine into Australia. With a couple of other guys, they got found not guilty, I got found guilty, and got sentenced to 18 years, and I served 8 of that 18 years, and I was released from prison in 2012, the 30th of March 2012. Between 15 and 17 years I spent in prisons over the years. So, in Melbourne, Canberra, I spent time in Canberra. Then I went to New South Wales. I spent about 4.5, 5 years in New South Wales prisons. And then I went to the Queensland prison and served 8 years straight in Queensland. So, it's none of them are any good. I never found a good prison. I hear some people go, "Oh, that's not a bad jail." I never found a good jail. That was just me. I never found a good jail. I found some jails where the perks were better, where I could bribe somebody to get better food in, or in the early days, bribe somebody to get drugs in. It's quite funny, in the early days I was bribing screws to get drugs, and then I was bribing screws to get food, So, yeah, you're still bribing.
So you've been through Pentridge?
Yeah, I went to Pentridge in 1971. That was horrific.
I love the jails.
Was Pentridge. Then I went from Pentridge back to a youth training centre, which was called Malmesbury. That was for boys over 17 years of age, because the judge disagreed that I should have been put in a man's prison, even though I was on serious charges. And when I got found not guilty of those charges, they put me back, and Boys Home was a breeze compared to Pentridge. Boys Home was just so good. You got weekend leave. And Pentridge, after I got released from Pentridge, I went to New South Wales to live. It was part of my parole condition. As soon as I got to New South Wales, I was arrested within months. I was sent to Long Bay Jail. Those days it was called the MRP, Metropolitan Remand Prison. From there I went to the CIP, which is the Central Industrial Prison. And I spent a couple of years in that prison there, 2 or 3 years in that prison. Then I went to a place called Milson's Island, which was a farm, which was an island on the Hawkesbury River. And I escaped from that place, and that was in 1977. I escaped from Milson Island. And I was only out 21 days, and I went back and they put me in a Parramatta prison, which was a harder prison. And then I went back to Long Bay, and I asked to go to Goulburn. I asked to go to Goulburn prison because that was the toughest prison in New South Wales. But it was the furthest prison away from the city, and there wasn't so much heroin there because people couldn't get there. It's harder for your family to visit. It was a maximum security prison. It was an incredibly tough prison. It was a very racial prison. They had the Aboriginals segregated from the white fellas, basically. And I had a mate there doing a double life sentence, recommendation never to be released, and who was a head sweeper, which they call billets in Victoria. And So I went there and I got a job as a sweeper and stayed in that unit for a long time and trained. And because I'd go to prison, the ironic part is I'd go to prison, I'd train, I'd get really healthy. I was super, super fit. Taught guys how to box, and I did everything in prison. I was the perfect human being. I had honour, I had principles, I had a man of my word. I could do all this stuff, and I was being managed. I had a system managing me. But the minute I'd be released, I couldn't live in society. I couldn't live in the world on the world's terms.
Yeah.
So I'd go straight back to crime. I knew nothing else because I was born into a criminal family. My father was a career criminal. My uncle was a career criminal. We moved to Melbourne in 1954. The first memory I have of the police coming to our house is 1957, with my father handcuffed with blood all over him. And I sat up in bed and pointed my fingers at the coppers and went bang, bang. I hated them. I had a hatred for the coppers. My whole life I had a hatred for the police. And by 1971, I was in Pentridge charged with having a shootout with the police. So it was just, it was going to happen. My father encouraged me to steal. I was rewarded for stealing. If I broke into a factory and they had a safe there, I'd go home and tell the old man. He'd get his mates. I'd go and cut the safe. They'd give me some, a few, those days old pounds and shillings. They'd give me a few shillings for giving the information. Plus, I was doing my own break and enters. At 12 years of age, I was convicted of a major crime. A 12-year-old boy was shop, break and steal. I'd broke into Coles, which was a big store in Victoria. And I'd brought all the other kids. We had, first time ever, we had new clothes. A lot of us kids had never had new clothes in our lives. Even though a man was a gangster, he was a gambler, so all the money went on the punt.
So you used to hang with the owners and dockers, was it?
Yeah, because the old man lost all his money on the horse races. He was a gambler. So it wouldn't matter how much money, because one week we could be eating, I'd say, fish and chips. The next week we'd be eating bread with fat on it, when we called dripping, So, my house was very volatile. People coming to my house with gunshot wounds. I remember my uncle being shot in the chest, and my mum was trying to get the board out, and they couldn't get the board out. It was too close to his heart, and they ended by taking him to the hospital. Even the hospital didn't take the bullet. He died 50-something years later with that bullet still in his chest, still next to his heart, because it was too close to his heart to take out. The people that I grew up with, it was normal to shoot each other. It was normal to be shot. Graham Jensen was my best friend. He was killed by the police, and then as soon as he got killed, his mates went and shot the cops, which they call the Walsh Street shootings. They went and, Victor Pearce, and they went and shot him. Well, Victor Pearce's older brother, his name was Peter Allen, and his brother was Dennis Allen. They called him Dr. Death. They were the guys I grew up with, and I escaped Peter out of jail in 1981 when I got out of Pentridge on bail. Peter was in a boys' home, so I went up and picked him up and helped him escape from boys' home, and met Peter's ex-girlfriend, and Peter and I both got children to the same girl. So, our life was just completely entwined in crime and just twisted, through that whole, world. It's a really small world when you're down there. Kathy Pennigal, who I love. I love Kathy. Everyone calls her, Granny Death and, evil Granny Evil and all that stuff. She was really always good to me. She was always good to me. Even as a kid, she was good to me. When I was at Goulburn Jail, trying to get off the drugs and trying to stay away from everybody, she was visiting my mate Bob Malcolm, and she'd call me out on the visit because she knew I didn't get visits, and she was kind. And it's funny, there's a story, I don't tell a lot of people, it's actually in my book. Kathy and I were sitting on the visit with Bob, and she said to me, she's got one eye, Kathy, where she got shot in the eye. And she's a funny lady, hard as nails, mate, hard. Like, you can't even believe how hard she is. And she said to me, she goes, "Do you know what, Ronnie, darling?" She said, "I've only got one regret, sweetheart." And I looked and I said, "What's that, Kath?" She said, "I never drowned that cunt when he was born." I said, "What?" She says, "Dennis. I should have fucking drowned him when he was born. That's her oldest boy." And I looked at him and I thought, whoa, that was pretty hectic for a mother to say, "I only have one regret that I should have drowned him when he was born," So, yeah, so they were the people I grew up with. So everything was normal. My mum stitching people up, my mum taking bullets out, the coppers coming to their house. There was only one rule in my family: you never told on anybody. You didn't tell on people. That was the rule. You got arrested, you didn't tell. You never talked to the coppers. if I came home from school, which I didn't go to school very much because my dad told me that education was for idiots, what I needed to learn, you couldn't learn in school. There's a few things that are quite strong in my memory. I remember somebody asked me what I wanted to be, and I said I wanted to be a lawyer. And my father's reply to that was, if you want to fight the coppers, buy a gun. Now, that was his mindset. So cut a long story short, there's two things my father hated. My father hated tattoos and he hated drug addicts. I've got a full body suit and I was a heroin addict. So in retrospect, you can see I was rebelling against my old man. Yeah, I've just I wrote the book in 2007 while I was doing my last sentence, which we didn't touch on that because after I got out of prison, I stayed out of prison for 20 years. And I got arrested in 2002 and got sentenced in 2004, and I went to Grafton, which was, a famous prison in New South Wales. That's where I was arrested, and they extradited me back to Queensland. There I went to what they called Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre. To me, it was a different world. From New South Wales prisons to Queensland prisons. Queensland prisons had cyclone fences around them with razor wire. The prisons I'd come from in Victoria were all bluestone colleges with big giant walls and prison guards on towers with guns. These new joints were all electronic zoos, electronic doors, because I'm used to the old Jackson 4 lever, big clank, clank lock, and the screws open the door and they clank, 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 Now these days it was just a push of a button and go, and all the doors would open, so it was quite funny. So I started writing a book in 2004. And I completed that book in 2007. I did a writing course while I was in prison, of course. And all my life, people said to me, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. And so I wrote the book. And then I was afraid to publish it. I was just afraid of, the stuff I talk about is really confronting and it's really honest. It's the truth. This is the truth, and it's a lot of gangsters. And the good part is most of them are dead now. I'm 68 years of age, so most of the guys that I talk about in this book from Melbourne were the Billy Longleys and the James Baisleys and the Alfie Nelson and
What's the name of the book?
The book's called Born into the Life of Crime, but it's got a cross through the F. It's Born into the Lie of Crime, because we think we've got a life of crime, but we haven't got a life of crime. We've got a life of lies. So yeah, I was going to call it The Truth About Nothing, and then we discussed it, my wife and I. She said, but it is the truth about everything, so it's not the truth about nothing. So we changed the name to, Born into a Lie of Crime. So, so when I wrote this, when I went and wrote the book, I had to try to write it to the best of my, and plus I was in prison, so I changed a lot of stuff around. And since I've been out of prison now since 2012, I've got John Killick, who's a pretty famous Australian criminal, and he escaped in a helicopter. He's a really good human being. Anyone that gets to know John understands that John Killick, who you read about, and John Killick, who you meet, are two different people. John Killick, the human being, is a really good human being. He's just a gentle, humble, loving human being. Well, I asked John if he'd rewrite my book for me. And at first he said, no, I don't want to write any more books, and I've just written one and I've got some other stuff going on. And I said to him, can I send you my manuscript I've written and you have a look and tell me? So I sent him the manuscript and he rang me up within 24 hours and said, oh, mate, I love this. I want to write it. I want to write your book, because he knew a lot of the names I talk about, a lot of the people I talk about. And it's not just all doom and gloom. There's some humour in it, There's one part in there with one of my best mates. They were doing they become bank robbers in the 70s, and one of the guys shot himself in the foot out the front of the bank. He cocked the gun, and his side of the story is that the gun got caught on the spring in the car, because old F.J. Holdens, and he shot himself in the foot, and the noise inside the car, as you can imagine. He turned around to my mate and said, oh, I think we might have to put this off till tomorrow. And they had to drive him to the hospital to get his foot for, surgery. And, those days you could just go and say, I've been out rabbiting and I shot myself in the foot. I'd carry a gun down the footpath on a rifle on my shoulder in the 60s and early 70s. There wasn't all this, drama with weapons like there is today. But it was normal. I've had guns my whole life. As a 12-year-old, I had weapons, As a 13-year-old, I've had 14, probably 14 rifles in my possession that I had at all times with bullets, and I hunted consistently. And in 1971, after the shooting with the police, I got out on bail for a very short period of time. And when I got home, my dad had Billy Longley and James Baisley, another guy called Kevin McGarry, living at our house. So indirectly, I got dragged into that bullshit of the painters and dockers war, and they wanted to drive around at night time and look for people to shoot, and those people were driving out at night time and shooting at us, and so by that stage I'm 17 years of age, hanging out with men who all been convicted for more than one murder, and so my concept of what life meant and what life was a little bit screwed up, to be quite honest. And they were also the type of men that I believe, and I know, weren't doing what they say they were doing. I remember we stopped one night out at the front of the Victorian markets, and there was a two-up game across the road who was the enemy's two-up game, because my old man owned a two-up game in Pram by this stage. And there's a poor guy on the door upstairs, and Longley said, shoot that there, shoot him, just put one in his leg. And I said, why? I said, who is he? And I looked through the scope of the rifle, and it's just some 30-year-old guy who's a doorman. They just put one in his leg, we'll put fear into him. And I said, man, I'm not shooting him for nothing. So even then I did have some sort of principle and moral. I wasn't, if it had been one of the enemy, I would have shot him, yeah, 100%, yeah, I'd shoot him, not a problem in the world. But, I wasn't going to shoot some poor guy who was probably getting $10 an hour or $50 a night to stand on a corner and get punched up by drunks trying to get into an illegal casino, So, yeah, I had a big fallout with the Texan over an incident that happened. It's in the book, where I exposed him as being a coward, and I told them that he was a coward. And we had an argument, and I said, no, I'm only a 17-year-old kid. And I'm saying, you're a coward, because someone shot at us, and he laid on the ground, and I seen him shoot the gun into the ground. He didn't shoot at them, he shot, because we were hiding behind a wall, so he shot the gun into the ground, so it looked like he was shooting back, but he wasn't. And after we'd had this discussion, Kevin McGarry took me for a walk. He said, come for a walk, kid, and my old man and Mick and Baisley and Longley had a chat about this kid that's uncontrollable and that's completely nuts, which is me. That night, Jimmy Baisley, Kevin McGarry, my old man, we all went for a drive looking for people. We all came home, and it was Longley's turn to be on watch, because we used to have turns of being on watch all night. Anyway, 7 o'clock in the morning, our home phone rang. You never had mobile phones. And one of the enemy rang and said to my dad, your mate Longley's just rang us and told us he'll give us the layout of your house. So Longley climbed out the window like a rat in the night, snuck away with his wife, and went to the enemy and rang him up and said, we'll tell you how the house is set up for the Isherwood, so you can go in there and knock them all. So I was right what I said. He was a dog, he was a grub, he was a coward, and it was, and these are the people that people all talk about loyalty and gangsters and, brotherhood, and it's all bullshit. That's why I call my book The Lie of Crime, because crime is a lie. Look, today, for the last, it's hypocritical in some ways, for the last 37 years, 42 years really, I started getting clean 42 years ago. I relapsed in 86, in 85, and I got clean again in 86. And I've stayed drug-free since the 3rd of March 1986. And I got re-involved, and I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's the truth. I got re-involved with an old friend and got arrested for conspiracy to import cocaine in 2002. When I sat in the cell, and I got sentenced to 18 years jail, and I sat in that cell and I thought, what do you really want to do? And I realised that I don't want to be a criminal anymore. I don't want to be a criminal. It's a lie. I got involved again when I should never. I'd been out of jail for 20 years, and here I'm sitting back in prison, and I'd lost a wife and my beautiful little 8-year-old daughter. I missed out on 8 years of her life growing up, and I reassessed my whole life. I just want to go back one little bit. In 1985, when I was in the middle of drug addiction, I'd relapsed. I had a dream, and I've told David this dream before, I'm sure. I had a dream, and I wasn't a religious person. I didn't believe in anything. And the dream was I died. And I was going to, because of our belief systems, I was going to wherever you go, and I get to wherever I'm going, there's a guy with long hair and he's got a gown on, and I'm justifying all the stuff I'd done in my past. I'm like, look, the guys I shot, they were gangsters, and most of the places I robbed, they were financial institutions, I was justifying everything. And this guy there was looking at me and he had this big smile on his face. And I get goosebumps when I say this, and it's been a long time. He said, "You don't get it, do you, Ron?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You committed the greatest sin known to man." And I just remember, and even when I said it, I went cold and I felt the fear. And he said, "You wasted the gift of life." And it just blew me away. It blew me away. I've been clean ever since then. I went to detox. I detoxed off 120 mil of methadone, cold turkey, and I stayed clean. And I think I had a spiritual awakening. On that day, I had some sort of spiritual awakening, because that was way beyond my mental capacity, way beyond my belief system, way beyond anything I can explain. So fast forward, 2002, 2004, I'm in prison, sentenced to 18 years. I think, how am I going to stay clean? I'm 16 years clean, off drugs. How can I stay clean? And the only way I can stay clean is by carrying the message of recovery. And the message of recovery comes from a higher power. It comes from someone more spiritual. It comes from a power far greater than myself. And, I've had this conversation with lots of people. I don't know who it is, but I don't have to know who it is because it works. I don't have to put a name on it. I laugh. Some people say there's 3,000 gods. Why has your God got to have a name? And it's true. My God just loves me, understands me, and forgives me. So it sounds funny. I started carrying love, understanding, and forgiveness in prison, in a system that's full of fucking hatred, in a system where everyone was just trying to score drugs and get on. But God works in funny ways. It's a funny word. God works in funny ways. I went to the prison. I organised for Narcotics Anonymous meetings to come into the prison. I organised for NA literature books to come into the prison, which were banned. I was given so much freedom because the powers above knew that I was sincere, and they knew that I was coming from a place of love and kindness. And I ended up in a place called Betrayal Correctional Centre, because all my time was done in maximum security. My co-accused / mate that got me back into the system, into the crime, he wasn't allowed to be in the same prison as me because they feared for his welfare, because, they thought that something was going to happen to him if him and I were in the same prison. Nothing was going to happen to him. I wasn't going to waste my life. I have a life, and I have a gift, and that gift is I can help people. I can carry the message of recovery to people who still suffer. And I got to this place called Barellan. The general manager there, he believed in recovery, and he said to me, "How can we carry a message to this place?" He said, "I want to start a unit with just drug-free people." He said, "Will you help me?" And I said, "Yeah, I will." And I have one of the best email references in the world from the governor of a prison saying that if you want to get clean, your life's in good hands with Ron Isherwood. And that's pretty cool coming from I'm an escapee. I'm a person who had a really violent history. And so we went to this rehab. We started the rehab. We went to this prison, started the rehab. We got a whole unit, completely segregated from the rest of the jail. We had special visits. A few girls fell pregnant on those visits. We had special visits. We had a lot more given to us, but we all stayed clean, and that's what it was all about. All the GM cared about that we stayed clean, and we did. So for nearly 10 months or 18 months, we had this incredible unit, and then the GM got moved. He got moved back to London because it was Serco that owned the prison, and the new GM that came in, he hated us, and he closed. He slowly eroded the system that we lived by, our principles, our demands of honesty, open-mindedness, reliability, congruence, thoroughness, consistency, respect. He slowly eroded them amongst the prisoners, and prisoners started using. And when everyone started using, I just said, "I'm out of here. I'm not staying here. I'm not a fraud. I'm not going to stay in a system that's being run by frauds and being used for our own selfish needs." So I left there, and I went back into my own unit, and but kept on carrying the message to the other prisoners. And I got out of prison, as I said, in 2012. Met a new lady, got married. We've got a couple of kids. I still carry the message. I try to help people anywhere I can. If somebody needs help 24 hours a day and they're sincere and they're not smashed, no good to ring them up when they're smashed. Ah, mate, I want to get off the gear. It's too late. You know, ring me when you're straight and tell me you want to get off the gear, you know. And so then we started The Truth About Addiction, which is, it's an online rehab. You do a 30-day program with me, blah, blah, blah. I got courage. And I always say courage comes from belief and faith. I always say courage comes from faith because to me, courage is doing things that you don't want to do. It's not courageous doing stuff that you want to do. That's not courage. Courage is doing what you don't want to do. And what I didn't want to do, I didn't want to finish my book. I didn't want to put myself out there from fear of judgment, but I also have children and there's other people who were going to get affected. And then I prayed about it. I pray about everything. I'm a funny guy. You know, for someone who doesn't have God, but I have a God, in my life, I do a lot of praying. You know, I pray every single day and I always have prayed. And I prayed and I came back, write the book, finish the book, publish the book. And the reason I published the book is because I believe it needs to be heard. It needs to be heard that we're not all born evil. You know, it takes years of practice. We're not born bad. It takes years of, misinformation, or it takes some dramatic trauma that's happened to us. You know, we're not victims and we are responsible. But, geez, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of other people that have caused great harm. And I believe hurt people. I really believe that. And we have to stop the cycle. So that's what my book came about. It came to stop the cycle and give people an understanding of we are responsible. My children don't get hit. My children get explained everything that happens to them. I have 40-year-old twin daughters who are beautiful. I have a 28-year-old daughter who's absolutely beautiful. You know, I have a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old, a 3-year-old. All my children get explained to the same as what anyone else across the street does, and they live by the same principles. You know, you have to have principles, you have to have morals, you have to have a belief system that if it's not helpful, if it's not honest, and if it's not beneficial, don't do it. Don't do it. And if someone tries to tell me something about somebody else, I say, first thing I say to them, is it honest? Do you know it's the truth? Is it beneficial? And it will help me telling me. And if it's no, don't tell me. I don't want gossip. I don't need gossip. I don't have room. My poor little, as I understand now, I've got a very small gigabyte. I haven't got the greatest, I took a lot of drugs. My memory bank's not the greatest, so I don't want to waste it with rubbish and shit, I like having love, understanding and kindness. I really love attracting people into my life who are doing what I'm doing, caring and helping other people, and we're putting each other back together. The system's not putting us back together. The psychiatrists filling us up with drugs are not helping us. They'd done that to me in 1971. That was my first drug ever. I'd never taken a drug till I went to prison. And they filled me full of drugs in prison. I came out of prison a drug addict, So that wasn't the answer. Beating me didn't make me a better person. It made me a harder person. It made me that hard that you couldn't hurt me anymore. Tearing up my letters and not letting me get visits from my family didn't make me a nicer person. It shut me off emotionally where I wanted to harm you. So, the system doesn't work. The system's broken. And the sooner we start to understand that we need to have change in the system, we will get change in human nature and human behaviour. And that's why I wrote the book. That's why I do what I do, because I'm here about change. I need change. I need a change in my life. And we can change, but we have to have a reason to change. And for me, that reason was love and faith. I have an incredible higher power that loves me, understands me, and forgives me. And it's important that I have love. That's all I've wanted my whole life. It's important that I have understanding, because I believe information's power, And it's important that I have forgiveness, because I'm a human being. I make mistakes, and I have made mistakes in the past. But I'm not my past. I am who I am today because I love doing what I do, and I'm blessed. I'm blessed. I say to everybody every day, I have an abundance. I don't buy lottery tickets because I've already won lotto. My life is lotto. My friendship with real human beings is lotto. Now, I don't have motivation for friendships. I don't want nothing from anybody else. I have a friend who I love dearly, and he's extremely wealthy, and he has other issues. And when I meet with him, I say to him, I don't care about your wealth, I care about your health. How you going, brother? And he laughs and he says, you're the only person that says that to me. He's extremely wealthy. I'm talking stupid money. And, and he says to me, I'm the only person that ever says it to him. I don't care about your wealth, I care about your health. Because as soon as you meet him, he wants to talk about his achievements with his financial career and how many hundreds of millions of dollars they're making and all. And I don't care. It doesn't impress me. Tell me you're putting food on the table and feeding your kids. Tell me you're driving your kid to school. Tell me you're reading your child a book. Tell me you're giving your mum a lift down to the doctors, that you're looking after your mum. That's the stuff that impresses me. And, I'm blessed. I am blessed. I really value, and I can't stand cheap. I'd rather not have it. I'd rather not have it. If it's cheap, I don't want it, And what I call cheap is imitation. If anything's imitation, I don't want it, I couldn't wear an imitation Rolex. I'm not that guy, I'm not that guy, gold-plated chain, like I've got a big, thick chain on, but it's 9 carat, I want 18 carat and I want it to be the best, And that's like my recovery and that's like my life. I want the best. And the only way you can get the best is by being the best. And the only way you can be the best is by caring for other people. Because I believe the more I care for other people, the more I get cared for. And the more I get out of my own life, the more room for my higher power to do his magic. I'm a really big believer in getting out of my own way so that when I'm in there, man, my hands are in the way, and he's like, move your hands, stupid, I'm trying to fix you, And I'm in there trying to fix you, saying, get your hands out of there, dummy, I'm the one taking care of you. And the more I let my higher power take care of me, the better my life is every single day. And that's the truth, And as I said, from the beginning, and I say this with an open heart, I don't know who the hell my higher power is, but I know that he loves me. I know that he understands me. I know I also know that he's patient. I'm 68 years of age. He's been putting up with me for a long time. And why am I still alive? Every guy I grew up with is dead. Every single guy that I was close to is either been killed by the police, killed by other criminals, or OD'd, or doing double life laggers and never to be released. Why am I the one that's been chosen? And I say it's because I have a message to carry. And that message is you can get off drugs and never have to use again. That you can also have a good life without being a gangster. Gangster to me, as I say, and I say it again, putting food on the table. Gangsters for me is helping an old lady across the street. Gangsters for me is not having expectations or conditions on friendships. That's gangster. My wife runs our company. I just do the work, man. She just runs all the IT stuff. I'm happy to answer the phone and talk to you and all that stuff. But, it's just Ronald the Truth About Addiction. That's our webpage. It's also Ronald the Truth About Addiction is our podcast. And we're on Spotify, YouTube. If you just Google Ron Isherwood, it'll come up.
The name of the book one more time.
The name of the book's Born into the Lie of Crime. Be released in August, we hope.
All right, much love, brother. It's good seeing you.
Thanks, David.